BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Black Box Ned 88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Well, this is mostly a true crime channel. Sometimes we get off in other subjects, and I would really say that any subject is fair game here. And yesterday, I was picking up the book Lords of Chaos, which I haven't been reading for a while, but I encountered something that I thought was quite interesting. Lords of Chaos is mostly talking about satanic influences in the music industry, but then they began to explore different influences, different human connections to other subjects. And one of them was mysticism, as well as the human relationship to nature, and very specifically looking at how does the human being respond to the image of the wolf? And why wolves? Well, wolves actually hold a very unique place in fantasy, and I mean, yes, you can even get away from mysticism and just look at the presence of the wolf in fantasy literature. What are the reasons for this? Well, there are numerous. Number one, wolves are pack animals, but they can also have the lone wolf. So we can think of it as unity or solidarity. And you can also say that wolves can be light or dark. They can be calm, or they can be very ferocious, like order and chaos. And these things definitely find their way into music and literature. And the book Lords of Chaos uses the example of Little Red Riding Hood. That's a perfect case example of a wolf trying to act in a calm way, but then has ferocity that can come outward. It was just some observations that I had never quite thought about. So I began to look at a few other sources talking about wolves and the connections to mysticism and the ideas associated in fantasy. And I encountered a YouTube channel that I had never seen before. It was from someone named Jordana Van, V-A-N, just like that, Jordana Van. And she mentioned a few things, that if someone is connected to wolves in totemography, or if they want to even say that a wolf is their spirit animal, everything that we just laid out initially, yes. However, in addition to that, wolves are one of the few animals that also use lots of nonverbal communication, but then they also make the howling noise to make some form of I'm tempted to use the word vocal outcry. Yes, many other animals do that, but not all. So wolves have many different ways that they can connect with people. In the same sense, someone who has the wolf as their spirit animal is going to be strong, they're going to be talkative, they're going to use lots of nonverbal communication, but they will also have somewhat of an outgoing presence. Now, when it comes to the way that wolves have interacted with humanity over the course of literature, as well as in the fantasy world, and when all of these things get blended in together, I'm always reminded of a particular writer named Serge Aroles, A-R-O-L-E-S. And I've been saying for a long time that I really need to read his book, Enigma of the Wolf Children. I believe it came out in 2007. It's been on my to-do list for a long time, but I haven't truly connected with that. I hope to do it at some point, because it explores the many of the stories about people, and forgive my language for the simplicity's sake, but who have been raised by wolves. Notice that the expression is not raised by foxes, because foxes are actually mostly a solitary animal. They kind of roam by themselves, whereas wolves often roam in packs, except with the exception of the lone wolf. We pay attention to the lone wolf because wolves are often social animals. They often congregate in the pack. So the thing to say about Enigma of the Wolf Children is there's this French writer, Serge Aroles, who documented everything from the archives. He is also a medical doctor, and he went through the entire archive of literature associated with children who could have potentially have been raised by wolves, as well as all other cases of feral children who have been reported to have been living in the wild. And he found out that there was only one case that appears to be purely authentic. And it was the story of an individual named Marie-Angelique Memy LeBlanc. We can just call her Marie. And she was actually an American. Well, I mean, we should say she was an American from the Meskwaki tribe. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And the thing is, she was from the present-day state of Wisconsin, and then she was first taken by the French-Canadian settlers, and then went from French Canada to France, and then she escaped there at the age of 9 and lived in the wild for 10 years from the age of 9 to the age of 19. And this is all in the book, once again, Enigma of the Wolf Children. Other than that, Serge Aroles makes the claim that all of these other stories of people being raised by wolves or people growing up in the wild, most of them are fictitious. And you really see, though, the human connection to wolves in the tales of the wolf boys of Hesse. Like, every so often, the city of Hesse in Germany would bring up a story about there's another child being raised by wolves, and they're trying to explore that particular angle. But according to Serge Aroles, many of those things are fictitious, or if there are other cases other than Marie who are living in the wild, then they were not properly documented. And in some examples, people are just using outright fictitious methods to spread stories. I mean, there can be a variety of reasons. One of them could even be for monetary gain. But there's a very famous story from France called Victor of Avignon, the wolf boy of Avignon, the wild boy of Avignon, and it actually becomes the foundation of the story of Tarzan. I mean, when people think about Tarzan, they probably wouldn't really think about someone living in the hills of France, but it's the legend would have it that there's this boy who went on to get the name Victor, was living in the wild, and that he was encountering all of these different aspects of nature, and he was existing on his own without any sort of group or adult supervision. He's living in the wild. When he would eat his food, he would pounce on it like a wild animal. And through the process of examination, Serge Aroles was trying to determine that stories like that are mostly fictitious, because what it really appears is someone like Victor was autistic and confined, most likely in a basement of sorts, for a number of years, and then he was able to escape, and people may have thought that he had been living in the wild for a number of years, but in reality he was probably just the victim of abuse. There's a very similar case similar to that coming from South Africa, the story of Lucas. I believe his name is spelled Lukas, Lucas. So what Serge Aroles said was, the only documented case of a child living in the wild is that of Marie, who went from Wisconsin to Canada and then into the nation of France. But it's interesting that the Meskwaki word that we talked about there, that doesn't mean wolf, that means fox. Like, Marie was from the Meskwaki tribe, but that actually reverts back to the name fox. I just thought that was an interesting thing to note. But when you're dealing, though, with the book Lords of Chaos, as we said, that's about the role of satanic influences in the music industry, but in reality, it's just a commentary on everything to do with life and such. And I thought that this was a particularly fascinating discussion, talking about the role of wolves in mysticism and in fantasy. But when you want to mention satanic influences on anything, it's not so much about, like, worshiping this devil-horned individual who's red and carries a pitchfork. It actually really seems like when you hear things associated with that, it's really quite to the contrary. And there are many different aspects of this, and this all ties into fantasy and mysticism, because many people can view their spiritual pathway or just their belief system, their philosophy, down similar guidelines, and it has nothing to do with the devil-horned individual with a pitchfork. For the upload today, I was thinking about doing something about King Diamond, the musician formerly of Merciful Fate, and, also with his act, King Diamond, talking about Satanism as a philosophy and some of the stances that people make about that. And very simply, his claim is just following the feeling that you have. That's really what it's about. And if you do not have a direct personal connection to somebody, you do not think about them. And his claim that he made on a Danish television show, I don't speak Danish, I was reading the subtitles, was all about how that is connected to the, it's just most people believe that. That's his claim. I don't subscribe to that, mind you. In fact, I think that that's an oversimplification. But he's saying most people believe that. Most people live that way. Most people are satanic and they do not know that. And in reality, I think that, like I said, it's something quite to the contrary. And this is all relevant to the discussion about wolves, mysticism, and fantasy, because what I really think most people do is they have somewhat of a respect and acknowledgement for nature, and that becomes a foundational pillar or tier on the hierarchy of values in association with mysticism and fantasy. And one of the ways that people do this is they often bond with a particular animal type, such as the wolf being the spirit animal. Like we mentioned the discussion from Jordana Van, if you don't use the term spirit animal, think about all the things that we said, though. It's the connection to nature and trying to relate character traits to things that are existing in nature. Back when I was, it's just about 10 years ago, I entered this writing competition, and there was, this challenge. It was just write a story about nature. And I remember, I was the only person that wrote about the ocean. I was like, that's natural, right? But everybody else wrote about the forest. When people think of nature, they often think of the forest. The wolf lives in the forest. And this is one of the reasons why people have this connection to wolves and mysticism and fantasy. Everything that we've already said to this point, yes. But they also believe that the wolf is something that they can use to understand the aspects of nature as well as the unknown. There's a reason why everybody chose to write about the forest except me. There's a reason why so many fantasy novels are set in the forest. There's a reason why musicians want to talk about it, and you'll find a satanic black metal band talking about the connections to the forests and nature. There is a very big reason. Because in the forest, you do not necessarily know everything that you're going to find, whether it's a new species of plant or it's something that is hiding behind the tree. You do not necessarily know everything that you are going to find. And human beings have this very large passion and desire to encounter the unknown. Even if you know people who are low in trade openness, they might still have a very big passion and sense of adventure. So they want to learn more and encounter more things about just the unknown in general. And when many people use their imagination, they often view the forest as a place where the unknown can flourish. And then people like to have things that they can use to familiarize themselves with this unknown. And the wolf becomes the gatekeeper or the filter. The wolf becomes the pathway. Wolf becomes the option that they have to try and understand this unknown element. I mean, can you think of a fantasy novel that has mentioned something about a forest? No matter which it is, even some of these Shakespearean plays and such, what really does that represent? I mean, yes, there's a mystic connection to this. And when I say mystic, I mean, mysticism can happen in a variety of ways. Some people can say that mysticism is simply just recognizing that you have a connection to a greater purpose, or all is one. Monistic spirituality could be a form of mysticism. But we also mentioned mysticism when we did our upload on Ludwig von Mises, talking about how the markets are extensions of nature and such. I mean, many people have their own definitions of mysticism, but I do believe that there is a human desire and a human connection to learn more about, just encountering the unknown and recognizing that we are all part of one continual cosmic entity, and that also includes many things on Earth that haven't been discovered. Yes, forests, but also the depths of the ocean, and perhaps the astronomical features as well. I mean, looking at the features of the moon as well. Now, then we're going to be talking about Mars. There are 2 continents on Venus, Aphrodite and Ishtar. I completely messed up those consonants. I messed up those continents. Excuse me if I got jumbled there in my speech for a little bit. But the whole point is that when you want to say is human beings do recognize that there is a fundamental principle in honoring nature. There's a fundamental principle in encountering nature because nature still has elements that we have not discovered yet. And human life really wants to connect to animal life. Back when we had a few discussions about Bigfoot, we mentioned that with Bigfoot, there are legends that happen all over the world. People are seeing a very tall, hairy primate that is walking throughout the forest on every continent. You'll find it in Australia, you'll find it in Russia, and of course here in America in various different aspects. And we mentioned some different legends from the Pacific Northwest as well as Florida during our most recent Bigfoot upload on the Skunk Ape of Florida, and Louisiana as well also ties in to this type of thinking. It's something that human beings do. They project character traits into nature. And one of the things that we see in this particular discussion is that the wolf becomes a very strong possibility and pathway for people to project their character traits and to use the wolf as somewhat of a guiding force throughout the concept of nature, and a way to navigate the unknown, or a piece of familiarity on the edge of the unknown. And this is like what I believe that the book Lords of Chaos was trying to encourage us to use. Now, there was a time when blue wolf iconography, if I'm using that word correctly, blue wolf imagery was very popular. And my ex-girlfriend, actually, from 2013, had this t-shirt that had this blue wolf on it. And we had a few conversations about it. And she said the wolf is a symbol of loneliness. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Wolves are pack animals. And then we had a little bit of a back and forth about that. One of the few good memories of that person, mind you. And the reason why blue wolves were perhaps chosen is because, once again, the wolf can be light, the wolf can be dark, also representing the color of moonlight, werewolves. Werewolves, vampires are also ways that people can explore the supernatural and paranormal, and they are tied to existing legends, and they're tied to existing stories like Dracula, Vlad the Impaler, and so on. Or, as we mentioned about the Wolf Boys of Hesse, and you can see how werewolf stories can expand upon these existing historical events. The Wolf Boys of Hesse, though, according to Serge Aroles, are nothing more than a legend. But the whole point is that people definitely use this type of imagery as a way to be a guiding force in life and to encounter things that they are curious about. I once made the claim on this channel that science is the study of the known. History is the... Did I say that right? No. History is the study of the known. Science is the study of the unknown. It wasn't really something that was my own invention. I heard a professor say it years ago. And some people have really disputed that with me. I mean, I don't know. I think it sounds all right. That science is the exploration of what we do not know, and once it becomes known, then it falls into the category of history, and we use the scientific method to try and encounter things. But when it comes to things like the appreciation of nature, recognizing the value of natural elements, as well as a place in the cosmic shuffle of things, as well as a place in this one continual cosmic entity, that is when mysticism comes into play. And when people want to expand this element of mysticism, which is very fascinating, it goes off into a direction for the imagination to thrive. And even in the forest, you will never run out of ways to explore the possibility of imagination. There will always be something behind this tree or that tree, behind the fallen log or the unturned stone or under the mushroom even, that will allow you to create something new. So you have creativity combined with the human desire to not only respect nature, but also to learn more about it, and just to learn more about the human relationship to existence as well. And the wolf becomes a navigating feature into that. If we're going to say things like the wolf is the strong animal that can also make the vocalizations, if you will. But aside from that, the wolf, as we said, also is something that can represent order and chaos. And I think that human beings are really attracted to these guiding points, and they want to use these things, though, to just simply shape a greater understanding of humanity. And not only humanity, I guess greater understanding of everything, mind you. Well, that's all for me now. Excuse me for jumbling some of those things in the middle. Aphrodite and Ishtar is what I tried to say in the center of that. I would love to hear what some of you guys have to say about any of the claims that we've made in this, about mysticism, about fantasy, about wolf imagery and art and literature and music. And one of the things that we should also remember is, just because somebody is wearing something like the t-shirt with the blue wolf on it and talking about the symbology of it all, not everyone is a genuine deep believer in these things, because Lords of Chaos mentioned that as well. What they said was, sometimes people look at something and it becomes popular, and then other people emulate from it because it is popular. And that's all it is. I mean, there's not an ounce of depth into that. And I think that's another reason why those Blue Wolf t-shirts became, very frequently sold, very widely sold and such. But at the same time, I mean, there's no harm in that. No harm in just simply wearing a design that you find attractive, more or less, if you're going to be talking about something like a wolf. Let's be careful with our words as well. All right, well, that's all for me now. If you have anything to say at all, please drop something in the comments section below. I would love to hear from you. Once again, excuse the imperfections in this one, and if you like this upload, you can hit the like button. It really helps out the channel, but that's all for me, and until next time.